Everything began the moment he took that hand. He had survived in harsh desert streets for as long as he could remember, no parents or guardians to speak of. His only concern was his life. He spent his days in the shadows out of sight of passers-by, holding his breath so that he could survive another day. That woman was the first person in his entire life who'd made eye contact with him. To the young Kukri, she was destiny incarnate. "Come with me, you shall learn under my tutelage." The moment he grasped that woman's outstretched hand, Kukri became her disciple. Kukri's teacher was a hermit living in the back regions of an African desert. She was the sole storyteller of forgotten folklore, and at times she was an advisor to people, using her metaphysical abilities to communicate with spirits. Life as her disciple was hardly luxurious, but it was peaceful. Kukri never had to fear for his life or wonder when he'd have his next meal. Still, he couldn't stand his master's dull instructions. She spoke passionately of a universe of possibilities that branched off at infinite junctions, a crucible of souls traversing the universes to maintain equilibrium, the mother goddess governing destruction and creation. But it was all an old wives' tale to the boy. Not once during meditation did he hear this voice of the earth his master spoke of, and before long he grew tired of her fervor storytelling. Inevitably he would snap and ask, "What's the point of all this?" And every time she would offer the same response with a gentle smile. "You too shall comprehend destiny one day." That life would end when Kukri had grown much taller, 7 years into his disciplehood. One day a sharp impulse struck him from inside out, as if piercing his body through, and Kukri awakened to his power of sand. But instead of simply appearing, the power ran amok against his will, whipping up a fierce sandstorm and robbing moisture from his surroundings. His master had unfortunately gone to the city, and by the time she'd returned, Kukri's power could no longer be contained. Amid the tempest, he feverishly cried out for her to save him. Eyes filled with resolve, the master dove headfirst into the sandstorm to rescue her disciple, in exchange for her own life. His memories of the time were hazy. All Kukri could remember were his master's irritatingly satisfied smile and the empty hollow of the grave he spent a day to dig for her. That evening, after giving his master a proper burial, the words Kukri had always heard during her teachings rose clearly in his mind. The crucible of souls connects all universes, converging all possibilities in the multiverse. However, these can only be perceived as illusions, and only a limited few are capable of meddling with them. Those with such abilities are known as amplified spectres. Neither the crucible of souls nor these illusions appear naturally on their side, but if there are distortions in space-time or resonance with amplified spectres, such circumstances may entice them to manifest on this plane. Kukri shot into the archives of his home and scoured through the literature, relying on his memory of the texts. The desk was piled high with scrolls, and his legs began to groan under the weight of stone slabs. Kukri paid it no mind, grabbing anything he could find and throwing it onto the heap. Do bear this in mind. Were the crucible of souls to appear in this world, allow not evildoers to approach. That power is incredibly dangerous. Theoretically, it could even revive the dead. As he skimmed through a text he'd recklessly thrown open, his hand had suddenly stopped at a certain passage. Hungrily taking in the knowledge, Kukri ruminated on his master's words. Theoretically, it could even revive the dead. The words he'd brushed off before now ironically told him of his last remaining possibility. With not a second to lose, he set out in pursuit of his goal. After scraping together the information he needed, he arrived at the King of Fighters tourney put on by Antonov. It was his final destination, or so he thought. All that Kukri found there was Ash Crimson, who had been revived by the aforementioned Crucible of Souls. His master, however, was nowhere to be found. In a city in southern France, an open terrace faces the main street. A man sits there, gesturing wildly as he rattles on. "All my efforts up to now, just a lonely fart in the wind. What the hell do I have to show for them? A pile of worthless papers in this dickhead Ash Crimson here. My dear sweet master, who guided me in my youth and sacrificed herself to protect me, is nowhere to be found. And so, the poor bastard you see before you has been left behind in loneliness and solitude. And what's more," his suspiciously hooded face and unrefined language contrast sharply against the gaudy, elegant atmosphere of the establishment. One by one, customers nearby retreat to indoor seating, hoping to escape the torrent of unending drivel disrupting their peaceful afternoon. By the time the man's round is finished, the only ones left on the terrace are the boy sitting across from him and an upper-class woman also beside him, who is listening patiently despite the frown on her face. The hooded man Kukri spreads his arms at the pair in an exaggerated gesture. And thus ends my impromptu tale, a miserable, heart-rending story guaranteed to leave not a dry eye in the room, heck, in the entire world. What do you think? Pretty good for something I thought of in 5 seconds, huh? I've got a hanky if you need to hunk some snot. That was pretty good. Not a bad way to kill some time. Goodness gracious. Ash Crimson chuckles at his smartphone, neglecting the half-eaten sack of torch in front of him. Elizabeth Blanktorch, on the other hand, puts her hand to her brow and sighs deeply. Before the previous tournament had begun, Kukri had made contact with the grief-stricken Elizabeth and helped her to recall her memories of Ash. In exchange for reviving Ash, Kukri sought the cooperation of the Blanktorch family, to which the noble woman assented without hesitation. As a result, Ash is once again by her side as if nothing happened. And yet... What's that sigh for? You're the one who wailed and moaned for me to talk. I made up this tearjerker just for you, like the nice guy I am. Kukri thrusts a bandaged finger at the woman. Sand scatters onto the table, and Ash wordlessly pulls the psychotorch closer to himself. You're our benefactor. We shall accompany you wherever we must in order to repay our debt of gratitude. Elizabeth speaks in a low stern voice, pointedly ignoring the finger in front of her face. I was simply curious as to why you extended a hand to us in the first place. No matter the reason, neither Ash nor myself have any intention of ridiculing your circumstances. There is nothing to laugh about. Her eyes fall to the cup in her hand with dejection, while Kukri maintains his imposing stance. Glancing between the two, Ash smirks in amusement. Let it go, Betty. We just have to play the part of Kukri's crew and help him do what he's got to do at KOF, right? Who the hell are you calling Kukri, you little twerp? You remind me of another piece of work, and I ain't having it. Oh look, they're doing a special feature. Ignoring Kukri's objection, Ash puts his smartphone on the table. The device shows a news program. Large letters reading "The King of Fighters" flash across the screen, and Kukri goes silent. Even Elizabeth takes a deep breath as if shifting gears. Next up, we have an exclusive interview with a participant from the KOF. Take a sneak peek inside the mind of a fighter. The feed switches from the studio to a city street, showing a woman standing opposite the interviewer. So Dolores, this will be your first foray into the KOF. How do you feel about... The woman pushes up her golden frames and faces the camera. Kukri's jaw clenches at the sight of her. He stands up without a word. When he finally speaks, the lower register of his voice betrays the emotion underneath. I remembered some urgent business. I'll go on ahead. With this declaration, Kukri walks briskly out of the establishment, his coat fluttering behind him. Incensed at his egocentric behaviour, Elizabeth also stands from her seat. Hold on, we are not finished speaking, Kukri. Elizabeth's heels clack against the cobblestones in hot pursuit. Keeping her in the corner of his eye, Ash glances at the leftover cake on the table. He made it up, huh? Sure. Stabbing a silver fork into his dessert, Ash Crimson chuckles softly. Alright then, might as well play along. He mutters in a voice barely audible, and, with a smack of his lips, eats up the final bite.
We await your return, warrior.